Imagine standing on a shore where every map you've ever trusted has been erased by the tide. You've crossed an ocean to build a future, only to realize the land itself is actively working to undo your progress. This wasn't just a settlement, it was a desperate gamble against an environment that didn't want them there. And long before history books whispered about a disappearance, the island of Roanoke was already writing the colony's obituary in the sand. But what if the true mystery wasn't how they vanished, but why they ever believed they could survive in the first place? If you are watching this right now, I want to ask you something. What really happened? Because every case you are about to hear has one thing in common. The investigation was closed, the file was sealed, and the truth was never found. These are the cases that detectives couldn't solve, that witnesses couldn't explain, and that official records couldn't account for. If you are someone who needs to know what really happened, you are in the right place. Subscribe to Unsolved Vault and join thousands of investigators uncovering the case's history left unfinished. Welcome back. This is Unsolved Vault, and today we open a case that was never meant to stay closed. Long before the name Roanoke became tied to one of history's oldest mysteries, the island had already shaped its own quiet character. Narrow strips of sand guarded the coast, while shallow waters twisted between hidden shoals that could confuse even experienced sailors. Thick forests reached almost to the shoreline, leaving only scattered openings beneath tall pines and sturdy oaks. Beyond them stretched a landscape where every path curved into another stand of trees, and every distant horizon seemed farther away than expected. A visitor arriving from the open Atlantic would notice the island through changing sensations rather than dramatic sights. Salt drifted constantly through the air, settling across clothing and skin before disappearing into the breeze. The ground shifted from dry sand to damp earth within a few careful steps. Birds called from unseen branches while waves rolled against distant beaches with a patient rhythm. Even during calm weather, the wind carried hints that conditions could change before another sunrise appeared across the water. Seasons slowly revealed how little control people could claim over this place. Summer warmth encouraged thick growth, yet heavy storms often swept across the coast with surprising force, breaking trees and reshaping stretches of shoreline overnight. Autumn brought cooler air and clearer skies, but it also reminded travelers that winter supplies would soon matter. Each passing month altered familiar landmarks in subtle ways, making yesterday's route less certain than anyone expected when first stepping onto the island. To those who searched maps from distant Europe, Roanoke appeared as a promising location waiting to be claimed. Standing upon its soil inspired a quieter understanding. The island offered beauty without comfort and opportunity without guarantees. Every view invited hope while quietly asking for patience, judgment, and respect. Before a single settlement rose among the trees, the land had already begun asking difficult questions of everyone willing to call it home. The first people who studied this coastline from the decks of wooden ships often believed they had found an inviting doorway into a new world. The view from the water seemed generous. Green forests stood beyond bright beaches, and sheltered sounds promised calmer waters than the restless Atlantic beyond the barrier islands. Yet the closer a vessel moved toward the shore, the more uncertain every decision became. Beneath the surface, shifting sandbars waited in places where yesterday's safe passage might no longer exist. A captain could rely on charts drawn only a short time before and still discover that the sea had quietly rewritten its own boundaries. The waters surrounding Roanoke rarely announced danger with dramatic signs. Instead, they tested patience and observation. Tides pulled in different directions through narrow channels. Winds that felt helpful during the morning could become stubborn obstacles before evening. A ship carried by confidence rather than caution might suddenly find its hull resting against hidden sand, unable to move while waves continued pressing from behind. Every arrival demanded careful judgment, and every departure depended upon conditions that no person could fully control. Beyond the shoreline, the forests introduced another set of quiet challenges. Tall pines filtered much of the sunlight before it reached the ground, creating long patterns of shadow that shifted through the day. Thick undergrowth slowed movement, while tangled vines concealed uneven ground beneath fallen leaves. Progress through the woods was measured in careful steps rather than easy miles. Someone could walk only a short distance before losing sight of the coast, surrounded instead by trees that offered few obvious landmarks to guide a return journey. Fresh water existed, yet finding dependable sources required local knowledge. Streams changed with the seasons, and low ground often collected standing water that appeared useful until closer inspection suggested otherwise. Food could certainly be gathered through fishing, hunting, and foraging, but none of those tasks guaranteed success on any particular day. The island rewarded attention instead of assumption. Every resource demanded effort, every meal reflected planning, and every mistake carried consequences that became larger as supplies diminished. Long before mystery entered the story, Roanoke had already revealed itself as a place where survival depended less upon ambition than upon learning the quiet rules written into the landscape itself. There was another force shaping Roanoke that could never be seen from a single viewpoint. The weather rarely followed the expectations of those unfamiliar with the Atlantic coast. A calm morning often encouraged confidence, yet distant clouds gathering beyond the horizon could transform the afternoon into something entirely different. Rain arrived in sweeping curtains that blurred the line between sea and sky. Strong winds bent the trees, scattered loose branches, and reminded every visitor that nature held the final decision over each passing day. Storms left marks that lasted long after the clouds disappeared. Shorelines shifted as waves carried away sand from one place and deposited it somewhere else. Small inlets widened, while familiar beaches narrowed almost without notice. Fallen trees blocked old paths through the forest, forcing travelers to search for new routes. Even the sounds of the island changed after heavy weather. Water collected in unexpected places, birds settled into different areas, and the landscape quietly rearranged itself, asking everyone to observe it again with fresh attention. Distance also carried an unusual meaning here. Looking across open water, another stretch of land often appeared close enough to reach with little effort. In reality, hidden channels, changing currents, and winding coastlines made short journeys take far longer than expected. Time slipped away while boats searched for safe crossings or waited for favorable tides. The island created the illusion of easy movement while quietly demanding patience from anyone who attempted to travel beyond familiar ground. These conditions shaped more than daily routines. They influenced every important choice made by those who hoped to build a future on Roanoke. Plans that seemed practical on paper often met a different reality once they encountered shifting weather and uncertain terrain. The island never openly rejected human ambition. Instead, it answered each new attempt with another quiet test, encouraging careful adaptation rather than confidence alone. Before the first permanent homes could truly take root, the land itself had already begun deciding which expectations would survive and which would slowly disappear into the changing coastal wilderness. Isolation reached Roanoke in ways that were easy to overlook at first. Standing on the shoreline, the vast Atlantic stretched eastward beyond the barrier islands, while endless forests extended inland. England existed somewhere far beyond that distant horizon, separated not by a simple voyage, but by thousands of miles of unpredictable ocean. Any message, supply, or request for help would require months to travel, assuming favorable winds and a successful crossing. Every decision made on the island carried extra weight because there was rarely an opportunity to correct a mistake quickly. The natural world offered constant reminders that this settlement occupied only a small place within a much larger environment. Deer moved silently through wooded clearings before disappearing into thick cover. Fish filled nearby waters during favorable seasons, while birds crossed the sky in patterns that changed throughout the year. These rhythms had developed over countless generations without waiting for newcomers to arrive. The island followed its own calendar, rewarding those who learned its cycles and frustrating those who expected the landscape to adjust to unfamiliar plans. As daylight faded, the character of Roanoke quietly transformed. Warm colors slipped from the trees, leaving long shadows beneath the forest canopy. The sounds of daytime birds gave way to insects, distant frogs, and the steady movement of water against the shore. Campfires pushed back only a small circle of darkness before the surrounding night gathered once more. Beyond that narrow glow stretched a world that remained largely unseen, encouraging careful listening when clear sight was no longer possible. This setting would eventually become known for unanswered questions. Yet the mystery did not begin with vanished people. It began with a place that asked more from every visitor than they first imagined. Roanoke was neither a welcoming paradise nor an impossible wilderness. It existed somewhere between those extremes, offering promise beside uncertainty. Long before history remembered the colony for its disappearance, the island had already revealed the quiet conditions that would shape every hope, every hardship, and every choice that followed. Every famous historical mystery begins with a setting, though that setting is often forgotten once the questions grow larger than the landscape itself. Roanoke deserves the opposite approach. Before names entered official records, and before theories filled books, the island had already established the quiet conditions that would shape every human story unfolding upon its shores. Geography was never a silent backdrop. It became an active partner, influencing movement, limiting choices, and quietly deciding how difficult survival would become for anyone hoping to remain. For those arriving from England during the late 16th century, the island represented possibility. It promised a foothold in an unfamiliar continent and the hope of a lasting settlement. Yet every encouraging view concealed practical challenges that revealed themselves only through experience. Safe harbors depended upon changing tides. Productive land demanded careful understanding. Familiar habits carried across the ocean did not always fit the realities of this distant coastline. Success required more than determination. It required learning a place that had no reason to follow expectations formed an ocean away. Looking back across the centuries, it is tempting to search immediately for dramatic clues or hidden messages. The famous mystery encourages that instinct. Yet the earliest secret of Roanoke is quieter than any carved word or missing settlement. The island itself was the first puzzle. It shaped every journey before the disappearance, every decision before the silence, and every hope before uncertainty settled over the colony. Understanding the land becomes the first step toward understanding everything that followed. As our story continues, attention will gradually shift from the island to the people who believed they could build permanent lives upon it. Their homes, routines, ambitions, and growing hardships would unfold against the landscape we have quietly explored. Only then does the deeper mystery begin to emerge. Before anyone vanished without explanation, they first had to live within a place that demanded patience, resilience, and respect from every person who crossed its shifting shores. Every unanswered question begins here. But as the initial wonder of discovery faded, the reality of their isolation began to tighten its grip. Survival required more than just hope. It required a complete transformation of their daily existence, shifting from the grand ambitions of explorers to the harsh, quiet labor of those simply trying to outlast the next storm. The first shelters on Roanoke rose from timber cut only a short distance away. Rough logs formed walls that kept out part of the wind, while roofs of wood and thatch offered modest protection from rain. Small clearings slowly appeared where dense forest had recently stood. Smoke climbed from simple chimneys, and narrow footpaths connected one dwelling to another. From a distance, the settlement looked like a determined beginning, though every building revealed how quickly it had been raised with limited tools and precious materials. Daily life unfolded through ordinary sounds and familiar tasks rather than dramatic events. The crack of an axe echoed through the trees before fading into birdsong. Cooking fires carried the scent of burning wood mixed with whatever food could be gathered that day. Damp earth clung to boots after morning work, while rough hands grew accustomed to splintered timber, coarse rope, and heavy buckets of water. Each evening brought tired bodies together around modest meals that rarely matched the hopes carried across the Atlantic. As the weeks passed, quiet changes began to shape the settlement. Stored supplies slowly grew lighter, and each open barrel represented one fewer reserve for the future. Gardens demanded patience before offering anything in return, while hunting and fishing produced uncertain results from one day to the next. Repairs became part of nearly every routine because weather, moisture, and constant use wore down shelters almost as quickly as they had been built. Confidence gradually shared its place with careful calculation. The greatest challenge was not always hunger or hard labor. It was the growing awareness of distance. England had become more than a homeland left behind. It had become a place that could not answer questions, replace broken tools, or quickly send relief when difficulties appeared. That realization settled quietly into everyday thought, changing how each decision was weighed. Hope remained alive, yet it slowly matured into something more cautious, shaped by the understanding that survival depended first upon the people already standing together on the island. Morning often began before the first light reached the roofs of the settlement. A few people stepped outside while the air still carried the coolness of the night, checking cooking fires that had been carefully preserved beneath ash. Others gathered simple tools before walking toward the forest, nearby fields, or the shoreline. There was no single routine shared by everyone because each day demanded different work. Some repaired damaged walls, some searched for food, and others collected fresh water or cut timber for future building. Every task answered an immediate need, leaving little room for work that could wait until another season. Food occupied a larger place in daily thought than many of the settlers had expected before crossing the Atlantic. The supplies carried from England had never been intended to last forever. They were meant to support the colony until local harvests could provide reliable nourishment. Reality unfolded more slowly. Crops required suitable ground, favorable weather, and valuable time. Fishing sometimes rewarded patient effort with full baskets, yet changing tides could just as easily produce disappointing catches. Hunting followed similar patterns. A successful day offered welcome relief, but the next could end with empty hands despite many hours of careful searching. Simple possessions gained unexpected importance as weeks became months. A sturdy knife, an iron cooking pot, a wooden bucket, or a reliable axe served many purposes every single day. When something broke, replacing it was rarely possible. Repairs became acts of necessity rather than convenience. Pieces of worn clothing were patched repeatedly. Handles were fitted onto damaged tools. Containers were reused long after their original purpose had ended. The settlement slowly developed a quiet habit of preserving almost everything because waste carried risks that grew larger with each passing season. These routines shaped the colony in subtle ways. Hard work alone could not guarantee success, yet neglect almost certainly invited hardship. Every finished task created another waiting to begin. Every improvement required continued care if it was to remain useful. The settlers discovered that building a home involved far more than raising walls or clearing land. It meant learning how to sustain ordinary life under unfamiliar conditions where every meal, every repaired tool, and every completed shelter represented another small victory against uncertainty. The settlement gradually developed its own rhythm, yet that rhythm was often interrupted by small disappointments rather than sudden disasters. A field that appeared healthy one week might reveal weak growth the next. Rain sometimes arrived when it was no longer welcome, soaking newly gathered firewood or slowing outdoor work. At other times, dry weather lingered longer than expected, leaving young crops struggling to establish deep roots. None of these moments seemed remarkable on their own, but together they quietly shaped the colony's future. Conversations naturally changed as conditions became more demanding. Early discussions about future expansion and lasting success slowly gave way to practical questions about the coming weeks. How much grain remained? Which fishing grounds had produced the best catches? Whether another shelter required urgent repairs before the next storm arrived. These were ordinary topics, yet they reflected a growing awareness that survival depended upon careful planning rather than hopeful expectation. Optimism had not disappeared, but experience had begun to guide it. The emotional weight of isolation also became more noticeable. Ships did not appear on the horizon with reassuring regularity. Days passed, then weeks, without news from England. The ocean that had once represented connection gradually came to represent distance. Families could remember familiar villages, churches, and marketplaces across the sea, but memory offered little practical comfort when tools wore out or supplies diminished. Every sunrise reminded the settlers that they were relying increasingly upon one another instead of distant promises. Even so, daily life never became entirely defined by hardship. Moments of quiet satisfaction continued to emerge. A repaired roof held through heavy rain. A successful hunt provided welcome meals for several households. Fresh vegetables finally appeared after weeks of careful tending. These modest achievements rarely entered official records, yet they mattered deeply to those who experienced them. They offered proof that patient effort could produce meaningful results, even as uncertainty continued to linger around the edges of every hopeful accomplishment. As months passed, the settlement began to reveal differences between expectation and reality. Many of the colonists had imagined that steady effort alone would gradually solve their difficulties. Instead, each season introduced new demands before the previous ones had fully disappeared. Timber needed replacing where damp weather encouraged decay. Small gardens required constant attention. Food stores had to be measured carefully, not only for the present day but for uncertain weeks ahead. Progress became less about moving forward and more about preserving what had already been achieved. The surrounding landscape offered opportunities, yet it also required knowledge that the newcomers were still learning. Fish gathered in certain waters during particular times of the year. Wild plants could provide useful nourishment, though only to those who recognized them. Forest trails seemed familiar after repeated journeys, but changing weather and thick vegetation could quickly alter even well-known routes. The island rewarded careful observation rather than confidence, teaching its lessons gradually through repeated experience instead of dramatic events. Within the settlement, cooperation became one of the colony's most valuable resources. A damaged roof was repaired more quickly when several hands worked together. Harvesting, carrying timber, preparing meals, and maintaining simple shelters all depended upon shared effort. Individual skill remained important, yet survival increasingly rested upon the willingness of neighbors to support one another through ordinary tasks. Quiet acts of assistance often carried greater value than grand displays of determination, strengthening the fragile community one day at a time. Beneath these routines, however, another feeling slowly gathered strength. Every successful day postponed immediate danger, but it could not guarantee the future. Supplies continued to shrink. Harvests remained uncertain. The hope that another English ship might soon appear never completely disappeared, yet each empty horizon encouraged quieter expectations. Without dramatic announcements or sudden turning points, optimism gradually settled into cautious endurance. The settlement continued its work, but every repaired wall, every shared meal, and every careful decision reflected the growing understanding that survival depended upon choices made within the colony itself. Looking back through surviving records, it is easy to search for dramatic moments that might explain what happened to the Roanoke colonists. Yet history often hides its greatest turning points inside ordinary days. A meal divided into smaller portions. A roof repaired before another storm. A tool preserved because no replacement could be expected. These quiet decisions rarely attracted attention at the time, but together they shaped the colony far more deeply than any single event. Daily life became the foundation upon which every later mystery would rest. The settlement had not failed through one overwhelming hardship. Instead, it faced many smaller challenges that slowly gathered into something more difficult to escape. Hunger rarely arrived all at once. Isolation became heavier with each passing month. Confidence faded gradually as practical experience replaced early assumptions about how easily a permanent community could be established. None of these changes announced themselves loudly. They settled into routine until the extraordinary quietly began to feel ordinary. Even within those growing pressures, the colonists continued searching for reasons to believe their efforts mattered. Children still needed care. Meals still had to be prepared. Homes required constant maintenance, and gardens demanded patient attention regardless of uncertainty. Life continued because there was no alternative. Every ordinary task carried an unspoken message that tomorrow remained worth preparing for, even when tomorrow offered no clear promises. That quiet determination may be one of the most remarkable parts of the Roanoke story. Soon our attention will move beyond the settlement itself and toward the people who had lived in this region long before English ships appeared along the coast. Their communities understood the rivers, forests, seasons, and changing shoreline through generations of experience. To the colonists, they represented nearby neighbors whose relationships could shape survival in ways that were not immediately obvious. The next chapter begins by stepping away from English routines and into a world that had always been part of Roanoke, even before the colony was built. Yet, as the colonists fought to carve a life out of the forest, they remained blissfully unaware that they were never the only ones watching the horizon. They believed they were the first to claim this land, but they had unknowingly stepped into the middle of a complex living network of alliances that had thrived for generations. Beyond the English settlement, another world had already taken shape through countless generations. Villages stood beside rivers, sounds, and forests that provided dependable food and familiar travel routes. Canoes moved across calm waters connecting neighboring communities, while narrow footpaths stretched inland through well-known woodland corridors. The landscape was not divided into empty spaces waiting for newcomers. It was woven together by relationships, traditions, and places whose histories reached far beyond the arrival of European ships along the Atlantic coast. A traveler entering this world would encounter patterns that revealed themselves through experience. The scent of wood smoke drifted from cooking fires before sunrise. Voices carried across the water as families prepared fishing nets or loaded canoes with goods for nearby settlements. The steady rhythm of paddles blended with birds calling above the marshes, while woven baskets filled with fish, corn, beans, and crafted tools reflected generations of practical knowledge shaped by the changing seasons and the surrounding land. As English colonists established their fragile settlement, these neighboring communities quietly observed the newcomers. Small meetings gradually became more frequent, bringing opportunities for exchange as well as uncertainty. Gifts, food, and useful information sometimes crossed the distance between different peoples. Yet every conversation also carried the possibility of misunderstanding. Words often required translation, customs held different meanings, and intentions that appeared clear to one side could easily become uncertain to the other. Looking back today, it becomes tempting to describe the region as a simple meeting between two different cultures. The reality was far more layered. The indigenous communities surrounding Roanoke already maintained alliances, rivalries, trade partnerships, and political relationships that had developed over many generations. The English settlers entered an existing network rather than creating one. Understanding that forgotten complexity quietly changes the mystery itself, revealing that the colony never stood alone but always existed within a living world of neighboring societies. The waterways surrounding Roanoke served a purpose far greater than simple travel. Long before English ships crossed the Atlantic, rivers, sounds, and sheltered channels connected communities across the region. Canoes carried people, food, tools, shells, animal skins, and carefully crafted goods between neighboring villages. These routes had been refined through generations of experience, following currents, seasonal conditions, and familiar landmarks. To an outsider, the waterways appeared as scattered stretches of water. To those who lived there, they formed an interconnected network that linked families, commerce, diplomacy, and shared knowledge. Trade involved far more than exchanging useful objects. Every meeting strengthened relationships that could last for many years. Villages offered resources that others could not easily obtain, creating natural partnerships across considerable distances. Fish from coastal waters, agricultural harvests from fertile ground, stone for tools, woven mats, pottery, and ornamental materials all moved through these established networks. The exchange of goods often carried conversations, news, and agreements alongside them. Information traveled with remarkable efficiency because trusted routes already connected communities throughout the region. Political life reflected a similar level of complexity. Individual villages often belonged to larger alliances led by influential chiefs, while neighboring groups maintained their own interests and priorities. Cooperation could bring security and prosperity, but disagreements also emerged over territory, resources, or shifting balances of influence. Alliances adapted over time as circumstances changed. Decisions rarely belonged to a single individual acting alone. They developed through discussions shaped by local traditions, practical needs, and the responsibilities carried by respected leaders within each community. When the English settlers arrived, many viewed the surrounding indigenous population as a single, unified society. That assumption quietly concealed an important truth. The newcomers had entered a region where every relationship already carried history, where every neighboring village occupied its own place within a wider political landscape. A friendly exchange with one community could influence attitudes elsewhere. A misunderstanding in one location might affect opportunities in another. The colony existed inside a network far more intricate than the settlers initially realized, making every future interaction part of a much larger story already unfolding across the waters and forests of coastal Carolina. The first meetings between the English colonists and nearby indigenous communities often began with careful observation rather than immediate trust. Each side watched the other through the lens of unfamiliar customs. Clothing, tools, gestures, and methods of communication all carried meanings that were not always understood. Curiosity encouraged conversation, yet uncertainty quietly remained in the background. Every encounter offered an opportunity to build cooperation, but it also revealed how easily different expectations could shape the same moment in completely different ways. Language presented one of the greatest challenges. Even when interpreters helped bridge the gap, Many ideas could not be translated with perfect accuracy. A promise spoken by one group might carry different obligations in another culture. A gift intended as friendship could be understood as part of an established tradition unfamiliar to the newcomers. Small misunderstandings rarely appeared significant at first, yet repeated over time they slowly influenced confidence between neighboring communities. Trust, once questioned, required patience and continued effort to strengthen again. Despite these obstacles, practical cooperation remained possible. Indigenous knowledge of local rivers, seasonal fishing grounds, edible plants, and agricultural methods offered valuable guidance to people still adapting to an unfamiliar landscape. The English brought metal tools and manufactured goods that attracted interest among some neighboring groups. These exchanges reflected mutual advantage rather than simple generosity. Both sides recognized opportunities within the relationship, even while remaining aware that different goals often shaped their decisions. The story of Roanoke is sometimes told as though two separate worlds briefly touched before moving apart. The evidence suggests something more complicated. Contact created new relationships that influenced daily life, trade, diplomacy, and survival on both sides. Every meeting carried possibilities that extended beyond the immediate conversation. Some strengthened cooperation. Others introduced uncertainty that would quietly echo through later events. The mystery surrounding the colony cannot be understood fully without recognizing that these early encounters became part of a larger and evolving human landscape, shaped as much by communication as by misunderstanding. As time passed, relationships across the region continued to evolve. Some neighboring communities found practical reasons to maintain peaceful contact with the English settlement, while others watched from a greater distance, measuring the newcomers against existing alliances and past experiences. No single response represented every indigenous group. Each community reached its own conclusions based upon local circumstances, long-standing political connections, and the changing balance of opportunity and risk. The landscape of diplomacy remained active, shaped by decisions that were often careful rather than immediate. Seasonal gatherings also played an important role in maintaining regional connections. People traveled to exchange goods, strengthen family ties, discuss important matters, and renew agreements that supported cooperation across neighboring territories. News spread naturally through these meetings, allowing information to move much farther than any single traveler could journey alone. Reports about unfamiliar visitors, successful harvests, disputes, or changing conditions became part of wider conversations that connected villages separated by rivers, forests, and coastal waters. Roanoke was never isolated from this flow of knowledge. For the English colonists, understanding these networks proved difficult. Many judged events according to customs they already knew from Europe, expecting familiar political structures and clear lines of authority. The reality before them followed different traditions developed over many generations. Decisions often reflected shared responsibilities, respected leadership, and relationships extending well beyond one settlement. What appeared simple from an outsider's perspective frequently concealed deeper histories that shaped every conversation and every agreement. Seen from this wider perspective, the mystery of Roanoke begins to shift. The colony no longer appears as a lonely settlement standing apart from the surrounding world. Instead, it becomes one small community living among many others with established histories, alliances, and systems of communication. That realization opens new possibilities for understanding later events. If the colonists disappeared, they did so within a region filled with people who already knew the land, understood its rhythms, and maintained connections reaching far beyond the limits of the English settlement itself. The world surrounding Roanoke was far richer and more connected than early English accounts often suggested. Rivers carried more than canoes. They carried information, relationships, and traditions that had developed over countless generations. Forest paths linked villages through patterns of movement that were understood long before European maps attempted to describe the region. What seemed unfamiliar to the colonists was, for their neighbors, a landscape filled with memory, purpose, and shared experience. Recognizing this wider network changes the way the mystery is approached. Instead of imagining the colony standing alone against an empty wilderness, we begin to see it as one small settlement surrounded by established societies with their own political priorities and cultural traditions. Every encounter, every exchange, and every misunderstanding became part of a larger story already unfolding across the Carolina coast. The English were participants in that story, not its authors. This broader perspective also reminds us to be cautious about simple explanations. Human relationships rarely follow a single path, especially when different languages, customs, and expectations meet for the first time. Cooperation and tension could exist side by side. Friendship might grow in one place while suspicion emerged in another. The history of Roanoke reflects these overlapping realities, where countless quiet decisions influenced events long before any dramatic mystery entered the historical record. Our attention now turns toward a single decision that transformed every possibility facing the colony. It was not made within the forests or along the waterways of Roanoke, but aboard a ship preparing to cross the Atlantic. When Governor John White sailed back to England for supplies, he expected to return quickly. Instead, circumstances far beyond the colony's control delayed his return for years, leaving the settlers to face an uncertain future without the help they had been promised. The stage was set, and the alliances were fragile, but everything was about to change. Governor John White stepped onto a ship, promising a swift return with the supplies that would save them. He had no idea that a global conflict was brewing, one that would trap him on the other side of the Atlantic for years. In just 48 hours, we uncover the exact moment that sealed the colony's fate, and why the man they trusted to save them was powerless to stop the clock.